Thank you, Mr Deputy Principal Speaker, and I thank you for the opportunity to update the Ad-Hoc Committee on the work that has been undertaken and is currently underway in the education sector in response to the current COVID-19 situation. In opening, may I say I am grateful to all those who work in early years, in schools, in the youth and wider educational sectors for their vital contribution at this very difficult time. The issues we are facing have never been encountered before, and all areas of society face difficult challenges. As ever, the physical and mental health and well-being of the young people in our care and all our staff must be our priority. Our teachers and school leaders are doing an excellent job in supporting our children and young people and providing remote learning that is maintaining a sense of daily routine. In particular, I want to thank those schools which are open today for key workers, children and vulnerable children, and those that intend to open over Easter and in the weeks ahead. In these extraordinary times, it's heartening that our principals and staff are showing such leadership and compassion for vulnerable pupils and those parents who are key to the COVID-19 response. I'm sure members will wish to join me in paying tribute to teaching and non-teaching staff, their trade union representatives and the increasing number of volunteers now coming forward, be they school governors, retired teachers, retired classroom assistants or colleagues from the wider educational sector. I am deeply grateful to them for the wholehearted, constructive and cooperative manner in which they have lent their support to the wider effort to respond to the enormous challenges posed by the COVID-19 outbreak. Before I go into detail on the Department's response to COVID-19, I would highlight that a formal offer on teachers' pay and workload was made yesterday to the 5 main teaching unions. I am pleased to say there has been progress on the issues of teachers' pay and workload. Since returning to the Executive in January, I have made resolution of this long-running industrial dispute a priority. Indeed, this is one of the main commitments made in the New Decade New Approach. I am grateful to Executive colleagues for the overall decisions on the budget allocation to the Department of Education. This has allowed me to ensure that appropriate financial provision for a pay award has been included in my decisions on the allocations within the Department of Education's 2021 budget. The 5 trade unions which make up the Northern Ireland Teaching Council will now consult with their members on the proposals in advance of any formal acceptance. And I would urge all teachers to consider the formal offer which, if accepted, will bring an end to the current industrial action which has been ongoing since January 2017 and which has had a debilitating effect on the sector. Turning to the COVID-19 situation, the Department's COVID-19 strategy and plan supports the overall executive strategy. Our plan is built around the following strategic priorities. Firstly, to ensure the continuity of learning for children and young people. Secondly, to support vulnerable children and the children of key workers. And thirdly, to ensure families do not experience hardship as a result of schools closing. Our central planning assumption is that schools and non-statutory preschool education settings will remain open to accommodate remote learning and to ensure that there is provision for vulnerable children and for key workers' children up to the end of Year 10. The vast majority of children should not attend school. The Department will follow the Public Health Agency advice at all times and will make sure the use of COVID-19 legislation and regulations making powers only where necessary. My department has put in place emergency response arrangements and is working closely with all its educational partners on a range of very complex issues arising from the coronavirus outbreak, including the Education Authority on service delivery issues, the Council for the Curriculum, Education and Assessment on examination issues, and working on a daily basis with the teachers' unions. Schools are regularly updated with appropriate advice as the situation evolves. These arrangements support the wider executive response to COVID-19. In the Department, we have focused our work on 6 priority areas, which I'll be touching upon. Firstly, pay for both the teaching and non-teaching workforce, free school meals, support for vulnerable children, distance learning, examination and support for key workers. May I say that all these areas we're attempting to address problems that have never been before encountered. We've been putting in place measures that we've never had to implement before, certainly not on this scale. and we're having to do all this at great speed with no opportunities to properly consult or properly to test. It's really a question of deliver quickly, assess impact on the ground and refine as we go. And all this with the workforce that has been impacted at an organisational level and at a personal level, like everyone else in society, by the issues that this terrible crisis has visited upon us. They have risen magnificently to the challenge. Turning to each of the elements in turn. Firstly, on pay for the teaching and non-teaching workforce, I can confirm that the education sector employees will continue to receive normal pay over the period of the COVID-19 crisis. Normal pay applies regardless of whether people are quarantined, medically advised to self-isolate, unable to work due to caring responsibilities, or unable to attend their workplace due to closure. The same arrangements apply to substitute teachers and non-teaching staff providing emergency cover for any periods they have been engaged to work. All current bookings through the Northern Ireland Substitute Teacher Register will be honoured. Absences will not count towards the normal triggers for the absence management or contractual sick pay and will not constitute a break in service for pensions or for other purposes. We are currently putting in place a contingency arrangements to ensure that the payrolls will be processed and payments made. Now, I recognise that some workers in education, such as the substitute teaching workforce, who provide a day-to-day cover, will no longer have access to secure work. Therefore, proposals have been developed for a hardship fund for those substitute teachers who are providing day-to-day cover in recent months, but whose regular work has now ended as a result of COVID-19. There is a separate bid that has been made to the Department of Finance to access the funding for this, but I would say that this funding will be dependent upon obtaining additional funding. Turning to the second issue of free school meals, to address concerns about the impact that school closures will have on children that are eligible for free school meals, a new direct payment scheme has been introduced for families whose children are eligible for a free school meal. From the 23rd of March, eligible families are receiving £2.70 per child per day for each day of term that schools are closed. This is paid fortnightly. And to avoid any further hardship payment, that is continuing over the Easter period for all the days, all the normal school days that would have, or the 10 days that would normally have occurred over the Easter period. To date, over 51,000 direct payments have been made to families in respect of 93,000 children, and by the 15th of April, over 96,000 children, their families will have received payments. Now, we are aware of a number of children who have not received direct payments because there's no bank account details have been made available to the Education Authority. The EA is working hard to obtain the bank details, and I would urge everyone whose children receive free school meals to get the details to the Education Authority as soon as possible. We also know that there are a number of children whose families have no bank accounts at all, and that includes 360 children of asylum seekers. And we're working with the Home Office to resolve this issue urgently. The Department for Communities has announced a number of additional measures to support provision of food and assistance to vulnerable groups, and we're working closely with the Department to ensure food is available to those families. As part of the voluntary and community sector response programme, coordinated DFC and agreed by the Executive, the Youth Service will engage alongside councils to assist in the provision of food for vulnerable young people. And indeed, the funding for that was agreed yesterday at the Executive, announced by the Finance Minister earlier on. A youth online website allows young people to register a food need. Going forward, their role is expected to involve provision of food for over 3,000 vulnerable young people who remain at risk despite the free school meal direct payments. And I'm grateful for the proactivity of the Youth Service have demonstrated in response to COVID-19 to date, and know that they will have a vital contribution to make working alongside other partners at local level. As in the rest of the UK, I'm prioritising support for vulnerable children and their parents and carers. I appreciate that school is a protective factor for many vulnerable children, and for some it offers the only stability in their lives. Vulnerable children should therefore be facilitated to attend schools where it is in their best interests and safe and appropriate to do so. Schools, parents, carers and social services where children have a social worker, should work closely together on determining the safest option for each child, and the Education Authority has a range of services in place to provide support for vulnerable children and their parents. My department continues to engage with colleagues in the health and social care sector to ensure that there is a continuum of support for these families, including those children on or on the cusp of the Child Protection Register, as particular pressures could materialise if they are at home for significant periods. We are also developing further guidance to support vulnerable children, including those attending special schools, and anticipate that this will be published shortly. The EA and health authorities have provided assurances that provisions are in place to meet the educational and care needs of special school children. Where schools have closed, the building to pupils, a range of creative approaches are in use, with a range of online learning platforms being used to maintain contact and engage directly with children. Protocols remain in place between schools and health and social care, keeping all of the needs of children at the forefront of decision-making. As our children and young people have more free time, it's only natural that they will spend more time online. We want to make sure that teachers, parents and carers have all the knowledge and advice that they need to keep children safe online, and I'll be announcing further measures to help them in the coming days. The Department has published guidance on its website in relation to social distancing and personal protection equipment, PPE, in education settings. Currently, NHS guidelines is that where staff and children are not symptomatic, then no PPE is required over and above normal good hygiene practices. Further guidance is being developed in Great Britain on the use of PPE in education sectors, including in relation to children and young people with complex needs. The equivalent Northern Ireland guidance will be published once it's been cleared by the Public Health Agency. That said, the EA has received a supply of PPE and cleaning materials, which is available to all schools, including special schools, on request, and there has been, in a number of occasions, there has been delivery of that equipment. It should be noted that, in the main, parents of special school children have decided to keep their children at home. Where key workers or parents of vulnerable children who normally attend a special school, or indeed any school, wish to send their children to school, they should in first instance discuss this with the school, who will determine if they can accommodate that request. In terms of distance learning, in the current context, distance learning is clearly vitally important to support continuity of learning and also provide a sense of purpose and daily routine for our children and young people. My department, together with the Council for the Curriculum, Examinations and Assessment, the Education Authority, ETI and CCMS, is focused on ensuring that appropriate action is taken as far as possible, learning, progression and well-being of our children and young people. Our delivery partners have identified designated link officers who are the first point of contact for the schools. These officers are working with schools, and indeed every school has a point of contact, to provide pastoral and practical support to ensure that individual issues are resolved promptly, and to identify where more can be done to provide support, provide provision for continuity of learning. Expertise in the EA, CCA and ETI is being used to ensure curriculum resources are available when and where is needed, and indeed there has been also additional offers of help from outside those bodies. Schools have been proactive in supporting home learning, and teachers have devised booklets to guide parents how to use learning platforms. Substantial capacity and provision exists within the Education Network Service to support learning and teaching outside the classroom. We are also seeing some very positive statistics. On Friday the 3rd of April, almost 45,000 individual students and teachers accessed the EA Education Network portal from home. In excess of 80,000 visits to the EA Education Network portal were made from home over a 24-hour period, and over 720,000 emails were sent and received by students and teachers within that 24-hour period. Turning now to qualifications and examinations, I recognise that exams are a key concern for children and parents. In the absence of exams this summer, my priority is to ensure that pupils can move on as planned to the next stage of their lives, be it starting university, further education, sixth form or apprenticeship or employment. It's crucial that no one is disadvantaged. So my officials have been working closely with CCEA and colleagues across the UK to develop appropriate arrangements that are robust as well as fair. I want to ensure that we maintain alignment with arrangements in England and Wales as far as possible, to ensure that learners are not disadvantaged, particularly in relation to admission to university. However, I need to take into account policy differences between the different jurisdictions and take the decisions that ultimately are right for the young people in Northern Ireland. CCEA has produced detailed advice to the Department on a range of options, and there's been assessment by my officials of these and consulting with key stakeholders, including representatives of head teachers and teaching unions. I expect to be in a position to make key decisions very soon and will announce these as soon as possible. Once I've taken those decisions, CCEA will be instructed to implement them as a matter of urgency. There will be a significant amount of detailed work required, including work to develop an appropriate appeals process and arrangements for private candidates. CCEA is developing detailed guidance for schools. This will be finalised and issued as soon as decisions are taken. My department is also working closely with the Department for the Economy to ensure that those taking vocational qualifications are not disadvantaged by the cancellation of scheduled exams and assessments, and the Economy Minister made reference to that yesterday. Members will be aware that the Executive have asked parents to keep children at home wherever possible and ask schools to remain open only for those children who absolutely need to attend. The education sector has been asked to deploy its resources as part of a wider national, indeed global effort to keep vital services functioning for the greater good. Schools are not open for normal business. Schools and preschool settings should be open where safe to do so, as per PHA guidance, to provide supervised learning for those children who are vulnerable or whose parents' work is vital for the functioning of essential services, i.e. key workers. This is a very last resort, and children should not come to school if alternative arrangements can be made. In recent weeks, approximately between 750 and 1,400 vulnerable children and children of key workers have attended around 400 to 500 schools. I should say that those figures are the individual figures for a particular day, and so the global number of children will actually be higher than that, because many parents will, for example, have maybe arrangements for 2 or 3 days but want to have their children in, so the figure can be a little bit misleading. And those key workers have attended 400 to 500 schools for supervised learning, education or educational supervision. In these schools, around about 750 teaching staff have been on site, along with around about 600 non-teaching staff. On a daily basis, we are gathering data from schools and the wider education sector on the key issues, including the number of schools that are open and the number of pupils at schools. So far, uptake of the scheme has been relatively low, consistent with the pattern elsewhere in Great Britain. This would suggest that parents are keeping their children at home where it is possible. This could change in the coming weeks due to predicted surge, but it will depend upon parental choices. Mechanisms are in place to capture the information needed to allow the Department and the managing authorities to refine, adjust and replan as necessary in light of this ever-changing situation. If a school leader considers it unsafe to open because they do not have the staff available, they should not be open, or should limit the number of pupils permitted accordingly. In addition to this, our schools have been working on a collaborative cluster arrangements, and work continues to bed this in on the ground. The Department has been working closely with the EA and other education partners to assign a link officer to every school or cluster to ensure that sufficient provision exists to care for vulnerable children and the children of our key critical workers, and this system again is bedding in well. The EA have a helpline for key workers and a registration scheme whereby key workers who are having trouble getting a placement for their children can request additional help to have their children placed. The numbers unplaced has decreased in a matter of days from 271 to the latest figures 131, is continuing to come down, and we're confident that these children will soon be placed soon. An increasing number of school leaders are coming to the fore to establish cluster arrangements with immediate effect, supported by EA teaching staff and volunteers to ensure that they have sufficient provision for the children who need it, and the Department, EA and other education partners continue to work closely and support this leadership on the ground in the coming days and weeks ahead. I would like to place on record my thanks to the educational leaders in our community who are playing their part to support vulnerable children and children of key workers by opening their schools and working collaboratively with other schools at this unprecedented times. We're all in this together, and we simply couldn't do it without this leadership. Members may also be aware that on the 27th of March, I announced a volunteering scheme to assist in the response to COVID-19. The aim of this scheme is to give extra support to teachers and other school staff to carry out the various duties that supervision of children require, and they've been ready to be deployed in the event that it becomes necessary. Early figures for the volunteer scheme are encouraging. As of today, 1,088 people have applied to be a volunteer, with so far 882 of those people have already been cleared by Access NI, and we are continuing to process applications. The scheme operates alongside the clustering measures that the Department and others are developing. Finally, in relation to childcare, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to inform members that, along with my colleague Robin Swan, the Minister for Health, we've published a joint announcement today which sets out the arrangements that we'll be putting in place to provide childcare for vulnerable children and the children of key workers across Northern Ireland. We've secured a significant funding package from the Executive of £12 million, which helps to address a number of key issues for childcare provision in response to the COVID-19, namely the need to ensure that registered childcare providers, including childminders who are providing childcare for a reduced number of vulnerable children and those of key workers during limited operating arrangements, can do so without risking the sustainability of their provision. Ensure that key workers and parents of vulnerable children can access childcare places and do not experience financial hardship as a result of needing longer hours for childcare or incurring higher costs for the bespoke approved home childcare scheme. Ensure that registered childcare, daycare providers and childminders who need to operate longer hours or holiday cover or evening provision are supported to do so. The package of emergency measures also seeks to address the issue of sectoral sustainability by developing a support measure for registered settings that have closed. I think we all need to realise that whenever we come out of this, we need to ensure that there is a childcare sector that is in place after this. This measure will interact with financial assistance measures announced by the Chancellor and administered by the Department of Economy, which childcare settings and childminders may be able to avail of. More detail of this package of support measures will be made available, but essentially we aim to provide a bespoke approved home childcare scheme aimed at enabling key workers to have their childcare needs met in their own homes, enhanced support for registered childminders who provide childcare for key workers and vulnerable children, support for registered daycare centres to remain open for key workers and vulnerable children in locations where key workers need them most and for those settings which have been forced to close, childcare advice and guidance for parents who are key workers, including a helpline, advice and guidance for registered settings and providers. I hope the measures that we have announced today will provide much needed reassurance to parents of vulnerable children and those who are key workers that a range of approved and registered childcare operations are available, and importantly that the additional costs keeping key aspects of provision operational during this time will not be simply passed on to them. Parents who need it will not be required to pay anything additional in terms of childcare costs during this period, which may rise from the approved home childcare scheme. Mr Principal Deputy Speaker, these measures do not change the starting position which we have adopted, which is, where possible, children should be cared for in their own homes. Schools, preschool, education settings, registered daycare facilities and childminders should only be providing care for the children of key workers and vulnerable children. It is essential that we work together across the education and health sectors to ensure that vulnerable children and those of key frontline staff can access safe and responsible provision. These new measures will sit alongside the support being provided by schools and preschool education settings for the children of key workers and vulnerable children. I know that childcare is a key issue for many parents. It becomes even more critical for key workers, and we need to support them in the fight against the coronavirus. I hope members agree that the package of measures Robin Swan and myself have announced today will go some way towards helping key workers access a wide range of childcare provision and also help protect and sustain the childcare sector so that it is in a position to remain open and for some reopen when the COVID-19 crisis ends. Mr Principal Deputy Speaker, it's difficult to overestimate the challenges that our society as a whole is facing as a consequence of the COVID-19 outbreak. Our lives, family and work are being influenced and impacted every day in ways that we could never have imagined a few weeks ago. The position on COVID-19 is exceptionally fast-moving, and I've made it my priority to bring as much clarity as possible, as quickly as possible, on the full range of very complex issues that we face. My department is working hard to support the education sector in the fight against the virus. In the months ahead, the department will continue to have a crucial role to play, not just in relation to the pressure felt by the education sector, but also the related health, economic and social issues felt by our society. I'm sure that by continuing to work closely together, we can make a very significant contribution to the overall effort to address and defeat this threat to the well-being of our society.